The whiskey glass hit the floor before Eliza could catch it. Not that anyone cared. The Rusty Nail Saloon had seen worse than broken glass on a Thursday night, had seen blood and teeth and the kind of violence that left stains no amount of scrubbing could lift. Eliza dropped to her knees, skirt soaking up whatever filth the floorboards had collected that week, and started picking up the shards with her bare hands. "Clumsy bitch," someone muttered from table 7. She didn't look up. Looking up meant eye contact, and eye contact meant conversation, and conversation with the kind of men who drank at the Rusty Nail after dark meant trouble. So she kept her head down, fingers moving fast, collecting glass fragments in her apron like they were worth something. They weren't. Nothing in Red Hollow was worth much except the land, and the land belonged to men like the ones sitting at table 7, men who'd inherited dirt and called it destiny, who measured their worth in acres and cattle and the number of people they could make feel small. "Another round," one of them called, snapping his fingers like she was a dog. Eliza stood, knees protesting. She was 23 but felt 40, her body a catalog of small pains that had accumulated over 5 years of this work. Bad ankles from standing, a constant ache in her lower back, hands so dry the skin cracked and bled no matter how much tallow she rubbed into them. She brought the whiskey. The man who'd called her a bitch, Frank Morrison, foreman at the Triple Creek Ranch, grabbed her wrist as she set down the bottle. His fingers were thick, calloused, strong enough to hurt without trying. "You got a smile for us tonight, Eliza?" he asked, breath heavy with tobacco and rot. She smiled. It was a skill she'd perfected, the smile that meant nothing, that lived only on her lips and never reached her eyes, that said "yes, sir," and "thank you, sir," and "whatever you need, sir," while her mind cataloged every exit in the room. "That's better," Frank said, releasing her wrist. "You're prettier when you smile." She walked away before he could see her face rearrange itself into something honest. The Rusty Nail was packed tonight, which meant good tips if she could survive until closing. Ranchers from 3 counties over, here for the cattle auction tomorrow. Gamblers and drifters and men who measured their manhood in how loud they could get, how much they could drink, how many women they could make uncomfortable before someone threw them out. Tom Early, the owner, didn't throw anyone out unless they drew blood. "Order up," called Jesse from the kitchen window. He was 14, too young to be working this late, but his mother had died last winter and his father drank more than he earned. Red Hollow had a lot of stories like that. Eliza grabbed the plates, steak and potatoes, overcooked and underseasoned, and delivered them to table 3. The men there didn't speak to her, didn't look at her, which made them her favorite customers. She existed only as a function. Bring food, bring drink, disappear. The night dragged. Somewhere around 10 o'clock, the piano player started up, a tuneless rendition of Buffalo Gals that made Eliza's teeth ache. The gambling tables in the back room got loud. A fight broke out near the bar, but ended before Tom had to intervene. Just 2 cowboys shoving each other, all performance and no real heat. Eliza kept moving. There was a rhythm to this work, a choreography she'd learned through repetition and necessity. Watch the door for new customers. Keep the drinks flowing. Dodge the hands that grabbed. Smile and nod and never, ever argue. Count the coins in her apron pocket between orders, adding them up, calculating how much closer she was to the impossible number she needed. $47. That's what Doc Pritchard had quoted her for Sarah's medicine. $47 for the pneumonia treatment her 12-year-old sister needed, or she wouldn't see spring. $47 might as well have been $400 or $4,000. Eliza made $6 a week on a good week. She'd been saving for 2 months and had $11.30 hidden in a coffee tin under the loose floorboard in the room she shared with Sarah. At this rate, Sarah would be dead before Eliza could afford to save her. The thought sat in her chest like a stone. "Hey, honey," called a voice from table 9. "What's a pretty thing like you doing in a place like this?" It was the same question they always asked, like it was original, like she hadn't heard it 500 times. She walked over, smile ready. "Working, same as everyone." The man was middle-aged, soft around the middle, wearing clothes that suggested money, but not much else. A merchant, maybe. Or a land speculator. Someone passing through who thought Red Hollow was quaint, who'd be gone by morning and wouldn't remember her face. "What's your name?" he asked. "Eliza." "Pretty name for a pretty girl." He leaned back, appraising her like livestock. "What's a smart girl like you want most in the world?" It was a drunk question, the kind meant to sound philosophical, but was really just an excuse to hear himself talk. The other men at his table grinned, waiting for her answer, expecting something they could mock. She should have said world peace or true love or something equally empty and unthreatening. Instead, she said, "Just one day off." The table went quiet for half a second. Then they laughed. Not cruel laughter exactly, more like the laughter of men who thought she was joking, who couldn't imagine that someone might actually be that tired, that ground down, that desperate for rest. "One day off," the merchant repeated, slapping the table. "I like her. She's funny." But it wasn't a joke. Eliza turned away before they could see her face crack. She made it 3 steps before the tears started, hot and furious and unwelcome. She blinked them back hard and headed for the kitchen. Jesse was washing dishes, hands red from the scalding water. "You okay?" he asked, because Jesse was a good kid, the kind who still noticed when people hurt. "Fine," Eliza said, voice steady. She splashed water on her face from the basin, cold enough to shock her back into composure. "Just tired." "You're always tired." "Yeah, well." She dried her face on her apron. "That's the job." She went back out. The crowd had gotten denser, louder. More bodies meant more heat, and the saloon was sweltering despite the November chill outside. Eliza moved through the press of men, collecting empty glasses, dodging elbows, existing in that invisible space that service workers occupy, seen but not seen, present but not present. That's when the door opened. Eliza noticed because everyone noticed. The noise level dropped, not to silence but to something quieter, more watchful, the kind of attention that meant someone important had arrived. She turned. The man in the doorway was tall, not exceptionally so, but tall enough to command the space. Dark hair, dark eyes, wearing a coat that probably cost more than Eliza made in 6 months. He had the kind of face that was hard to read, sharp jaw, high cheekbones, a mouth that looked like it didn't smile often. But it was the way he moved that struck her. No swagger, no performance, just a quiet confidence that suggested he didn't need to prove anything to anyone. He scanned the room once, gaze methodical, then headed for an empty table in the corner. "That's Colt Ashford," someone whispered nearby. The name meant nothing to Eliza. "The Ashford Ranch?" the voice continued, incredulous. "Biggest spread in 3 counties? His family owns half of Red Hollow." Eliza filed the information away and got back to work. Rich men were still just men, and men still needed their drinks poured and their egos stroked. She'd learned not to be impressed by money. Money didn't make anyone kinder, or smarter, or worth knowing. Still, when Tom Early caught her eye and jerked his chin toward Ashford's table, she went. The walk across the saloon felt longer than it should have. She was aware suddenly of how she looked, dress stained and worn, hair falling out of its pins, the smell of grease and sweat clinging to her skin. She tried to care and couldn't quite manage it. Vanity was a luxury, and she'd run out of luxuries a long time ago. "What can I get you?" she asked when she reached the table. Ashford looked up. His eyes were gray, not the soft gray of rain clouds, but the hard gray of iron. They settled on her face with an intensity that made her want to step back, but she held her ground. "Whiskey," he said. "Neat." His voice was low, controlled, the kind of voice that didn't need to get loud to be heard. "Yes, sir." She turned to go, but he spoke again. "You're Eliza Vance." She stopped, turned back. "How do you know my name?" "Small town." He tilted his head slightly, studying her. "You've been working here about 5 years." "That's right." Wariness crept into her voice. Rich men didn't usually bother learning the names of saloon girls unless they wanted something, and what they wanted was never good. But Ashford just nodded, once, and looked away. "The whiskey, please." Dismissed. Eliza went to the bar, poured the drink, brought it back, set it down carefully, not quite meeting his eyes. 2 bits. He put down a silver $1. She waited for him to tell her to keep the change, the way rich men did when they wanted to feel magnanimous. But he didn't say anything, so she counted out 6 quarters and put them on the table. "Thank you," he said. And that was it. She went back to work. But she felt his gaze on her throughout the night. Not constantly, not obtrusively, but often enough that she noticed. It wasn't the hungry stare she'd learned to recognize, the one that made her skin crawl. This was something else, something closer to curiosity. It unsettled her more than she wanted to admit. The rest of the night blurred together in the usual way. Drinks poured, plates delivered, coins counted. Frank Morrison grabbed her ass on his way out the door, and she smiled and said nothing because that's what you did if you wanted to keep your job. A gambler threw up in the corner, and Jesse cleaned it while Eliza served his table. The piano player finally quit around midnight, and the resulting quiet was almost shocking. By 1 in the morning, only a handful of customers remained. Ashford was still there, nursing the same glass of whiskey he'd ordered hours ago. He hadn't spoken to anyone, hadn't joined the card games or the drunken debates, just sat there, watching her. Tom Early started turning off lamps, the universal signal that the Rusty Nail was closing. The last customer stumbled out into the night, loud and careless. Eliza began collecting glasses, stacking them on her tray with the mechanical efficiency of someone who'd done this 1,000 times. When she reached Ashford's table, he stood. "Long night," he said. "Every night's long." The words came out sharper than she'd intended, edged with exhaustion. Something flickered in his expression. Not anger, but something she couldn't quite name. He reached into his coat and pulled out a leather billfold. From it, he extracted a $10 bill and placed it on the table. Eliza stared at it. $10, almost a month's wages. "I don't need your charity," she said, voice flat. "It's not charity." He met her eyes, and there was no pity in his gaze. "It's payment for your work. I poured you one drink 6 hours ago, and you've been working nonstop ever since." He gestured to the saloon, the empty tables, the floor still sticky with spilled liquor. "That deserves compensation." Eliza's hands tightened on the tray. Every instinct screamed at her to take the money. Sarah needed medicine, and $10 was $10, and pride didn't cure pneumonia. But accepting this felt like crossing a line, like admitting she was the kind of desperate he clearly thought she was. "I don't want your money," she said. "Then what do you want?" The question hung in the air between them. What did she want? She wanted her father back. Wanted the mind collapse that killed him to unhappen. Wanted the 5 years since his death to rewind, to find herself 16 again, with a future that held something other than this endless grinding survival. She wanted Sarah to breathe easy, wanted to sleep without nightmares, wanted one single day where she didn't have to calculate whether she could afford to eat or if that money should go toward rent. But she couldn't say any of that to a stranger, especially not a rich stranger who'd probably never wanted for anything in his life. So she said, "I want you to leave me alone." Ashford studied her for a long moment, then he nodded, picked up the $10 bill, and walked toward the door. Relief and regret hit her in equal measure. But at the door, he stopped, turned back. "You said you wanted one day off," he said quietly. "I heard you." Then he left. Eliza stood there, tray in her hands, trying to figure out what had just happened. Tom Early was counting the till, and Jessie was sweeping, and everything was normal except for the strange hollow feeling in her chest. She finished cleaning, collected her pay, $6.40, including tips. Tom had docked her 20 cents for the broken whiskey glass, which was fair enough. She tied the coins into a handkerchief, tucked it into her pocket, and headed for the door. The November air hit her like a slap, cold and clean after the stale heat of the saloon. Red Hollow was dark, except for a few scattered oil lamps and windows. The main street was empty, quiet. Somewhere a dog barked. Eliza pulled her shawl tighter and started the walk home. Home was a generous word for the single room she and Sarah rented above Fletcher's Hardware. It was small and drafty, with a window that didn't close properly and a door that didn't lock. But it was theirs, and the rent was manageable, and Mrs. Fletcher downstairs didn't ask questions when the rent was late. Eliza climbed the exterior stairs carefully. The wood was rotting and one of the planks was loose. She could hear Sarah coughing before she opened the door. The sound made her chest tight. Inside, their room was lit by a single candle. Sarah was curled on the bed they shared, wrapped in every blanket they owned, shivering despite the extra layers. Her face was flushed, her breathing labored. "Hey, Bug," Eliza said softly, crossing to the bed. Sarah opened her eyes. They were fever bright. "You're home." "I'm home." Eliza pressed her hand to Sarah's forehead. "Too hot." "How are you feeling?" "Okay." A lie, but a brave one. Eliza pulled the coffee tin from its hiding place and added tonight's earnings to the small pile of coins inside. $11.70 now. still nowhere near 47. She made Sarah drink water, which turned into a coughing fit that left them both shaken. When it passed, Eliza lay down beside her sister, fully clothed, and pulled the blankets up. "Tell me a story," Sarah whispered. "You're too old for stories." "No, I'm not." Eliza was too tired to argue. "Once upon a time," she began, "there was a girl who worked in a saloon." "That's a terrible story." "You asked for it." Sarah laughed, which turned into more coughing. When it subsided, she nestled closer. "Liza?" "Yeah?" "Are we going to be okay?" The question sat in the dark between them. Eliza wanted to say yes, wanted to promise that everything would work out, that Sarah would get better, that they'd find a way through this like they'd found a way through everything else. But she was tired of lying. "I don't know," she said honestly, "but I'm trying." "I know." Sarah's breathing evened out gradually, slipping into the rattling cadence of sleep. Eliza lay awake, staring at the ceiling, counting problems instead of sheep. $47 minus $11.70 left $35.30. At $6.40 a week, assuming she didn't get docked for broken glasses or have to buy food or pay rent, she could save it in 5.5 weeks. Sarah didn't have 5.5 weeks. Doc Pritchard had been clear about that. So Eliza lay there in the dark, listening to her sister struggle to breathe, and tried to figure out how to bend mathematics to her will. Tried to find some angle, some solution, some miracle she'd overlooked. Nothing came. Eventually, exhaustion dragged her under. She dreamed of her father, not as he'd been at the end, broken and buried under tons of rock, but as he'd been before, strong and laughing, swinging her in circles until she shrieked with joy. In the dream, he told her everything would be fine. She woke knowing it was a lie. Dawn came gray and cold. Sarah was worse, her fever higher, her cough wetter. Eliza got her to drink more water, then left for her morning shift at the general store where she worked 9 to noon 6 days a week for $2. The day crawled. Mrs. Henderson, who owned the store, was in a mood. She criticized the way Eliza stacked the canned goods, the way she greeted customers, the way she breathed. Eliza took it silently because talking back meant losing the job, and losing the job meant losing everything. At noon, she collected her 33 cents and headed to the Rusty Nail. Tom was behind the bar prepping for the evening crowd. "You're early," he said. "Can I pick up an extra shift?" The words came out desperate. "Tonight, tomorrow, whenever. I need the hours." Tom's face softened slightly. He wasn't a kind man, but he wasn't completely heartless either. "Business is slow. I can give you Thursday nights, but that's it." Thursday nights paid less, shorter shift, fewer customers, but it was something. "Thank you," Eliza said. She worked straight through until 2 in the morning, served drinks, dodged hands, smiled until her face hurt, counted her coins, $7.10. When she got home, Sarah was asleep, her breathing slightly easier. A small mercy. Eliza collapsed beside her and was unconscious in seconds. The pattern repeated. Days blurred into each other, a continuous loop of work and worry and mathematical impossibilities. Sarah got worse, then a little better, then worse again. The coffee tin filled slowly. $13, $15, $17. Not enough. Never enough. And through it all, Eliza couldn't shake the memory of gray eyes and a quiet voice saying, "I heard you." She told herself it didn't matter. Rich men came and went. They noticed you when it suited them and forgot you just as easily. Whatever Colt Ashford had seen or heard that night, it was gone now, dissolved into the general indifference of people who'd never had to choose between medicine and food. But on Friday night, a week after their first encounter, he came back. Same table, same quiet presence. And when Eliza brought his whiskey, he looked at her and said, "How's your sister?" The question stopped her cold. "What?" "Your sister, Sarah." His expression was unreadable. "Is she improving?" Eliza's throat went tight. "How do you—" "Small town," he said again, but there was something deliberate in his tone, something that suggested he'd asked around, learned things, paid attention. She didn't know whether to be touched or terrified. "She's fine," Eliza lied. "Doc Pritchard's medicine is expensive." Not a question, a statement. Eliza set down the whiskey harder than she intended. "I didn't ask for your help." "No," Ashford agreed. "You didn't." He placed something on the table. An envelope. Eliza looked at it like it might bite. What is that? Payment. He pushed it toward her. My housekeeper quit last month. The position needs filling, room, board, and $20 a month, if you're interested. $20 a month. The number made her dizzy. Why? The word came out suspicious, sharp. You don't know me. I know enough. He stood, leaving the envelope on the table. Think about it. If you want the job, come to the ranch tomorrow. If not, no hard feelings. He walked out before she could respond. Eliza stared at the envelope for a long time before picking it up. Inside was a single sheet of paper with an address and directions. No money, no strings, just an offer. She didn't trust it, couldn't trust it. But that night, listening to Sarah cough herself awake, Eliza pulled out the paper and read it again. $20 a month. Room and board meant she could stop paying rent, stop buying food. $20 a month meant $47 in just over 2 months. It meant Sarah had a chance. So when dawn came, Eliza made a decision. She was going to the Ashford ranch, not because she trusted Colt Ashford, but because sometimes survival meant taking risks with men you didn't trust. And if she'd learned anything in 5 years of clawing her way through life in Red Hollow, it was this. You did what you had to do to keep the people you loved alive, even if it killed you. The Ashford Ranch sat 5 miles outside Red Hollow, far enough from town that the noise and smoke gave way to open sky and rolling grassland. Eliza made the walk on foot, carrying Sarah on her back because the girl couldn't manage the distance on her own anymore. Each step felt like a negotiation between necessity and pride was losing badly. You can put me down, Sarah whispered against her shoulder. I can walk. Save your strength. I'm not a baby. Never said you were. Eliza adjusted her grip, ignoring the ache in her shoulders. But if you fall down out here, I'm the one who has to pick you up, so let me do this the easy way. Sarah went quiet after that, but her arms tightened around Eliza's neck. Less resistance, more trust. The ranch appeared gradually, first the fence line, then the main gate with its iron scrollwork spelling out Ashford, in letters big enough to read from a quarter-mile away. Beyond that, buildings spread across the landscape like a small town unto itself. Barns, stables, workers' quarters, and at the center of it all, a house that made Eliza's stomach tighten. It wasn't a mansion, exactly, not the kind of ostentatious display she'd seen in newspaper sketches of eastern estates. But it was large and well-built, 2 stories of whitewashed wood and glass windows that caught the morning sun. The kind of house that spoke quietly about money, the way truly wealthy people did, not shouting, just existing in a space most folks couldn't touch. Eliza stopped at the gate. Maybe this is a bad idea, she said, mostly to herself. We came all this way. Sarah's voice was scratchy, tired. Might as well knock. The gate wasn't locked. Eliza pushed it open and walked up the long drive, acutely aware of how they must look. 2 worn-down girls in patched dresses, one carrying the other like refugees. She half expected someone to come out and turn them away before they reached the porch, but no one came. The front door was solid oak, fitted with brass hardware that probably cost more than Eliza made in 6 months. She set Sarah down gently, straightened her own dress as much as possible, and knocked. Silence. She knocked again, harder. The door opened. The woman standing there was maybe 50, gray-haired and stern-faced, wearing a simple dark dress and an expression that suggested she'd already decided Eliza wasn't worth her time. Deliveries go around back, the woman said. I'm not delivering anything. Eliza pulled out the paper Ashford had given her. Mr. Ashford said there was a position available. The woman's eyes narrowed. She took the paper, read it, and her expression shifted. Not to warmth exactly, but to something less openly hostile. You're the girl from the saloon. It wasn't a question, but Eliza answered anyway. Yes, ma'am. And this? The woman's gaze moved to Sarah. My sister. Mr. Ashford said room and board was included. For you. Not for both of us or neither. Eliza kept her voice level, but there was iron underneath. That's the deal. They stared at each other for a long moment. Eliza had learned to read people in the saloon, to gauge when someone was bluffing and when they meant business. This woman wasn't bluffing, but she also wasn't the one making decisions. Wait here, the woman said finally, and closed the door. Eliza and Sarah stood on the porch. Minutes passed. A dog barked somewhere behind the house. A ranch hand walked by leading a horse and didn't look at them. Sarah started coughing. Eliza rubbed her back, helpless, while the fit ran its course. When it passed, Sarah was pale and shaking. "Can we sit down?" she asked. There was a bench against the house. Eliza helped her sister to it, and they sat, two girls who didn't belong here waiting to be told as much. The door opened again. This time it was Ashford. He looked different in daylight, less severe somehow, though maybe that was just the sun softening the hard angles of his face. He wore work clothes, not the expensive coat from the saloon, and his sleeves were rolled up. "You came," he said. "You offered a job." Eliza stood. "But if you're not willing to take both of us—" "I didn't say that." He looked at Sarah and something in his expression shifted. "She needs a doctor." "I know what she needs." The words came out sharper than Eliza intended. "That's why I'm here." Ashford nodded slowly. Then he turned to the stern-faced woman who'd reappeared behind him. "Mrs. Calloway, prepare the east bedroom, and send someone for Doc Pritchard." "Mr. Ashford, I really don't think—" "Please," he said, and it wasn't a request. Mrs. Calloway's mouth thinned, but she nodded and disappeared into the house. Ashford looked back at Eliza. "Can she walk?" "I can walk," Sarah said before Eliza could answer, and stood to prove it. She made it 3 steps before her knees buckled. Ashford caught her. Eliza moved instinctively, ready to grab Sarah back, but stopped when she saw the way he held her sister, carefully, like she was fragile. Not with pity, just with care. "I've got her," he said quietly. "Come inside." The house's interior matched its exterior. Understated wealth. Hardwood floors, wallpaper that wasn't faded or peeling, furniture that looked like it had been built to last centuries. Eliza's worn boots left marks on the polished floor, and she tried not to notice. Ashford carried Sarah up the stairs. Eliza followed, cataloging exit routes out of habit, noting which windows opened and which doors led where. The bedroom he brought them to was bigger than the entire room she and Sarah had been living in. A real bed with a real mattress, a fireplace, curtains that weren't just functional, but decorative. He set Sarah down on the bed. "Thank you," Eliza said, because manners cost nothing and she needed this man on her side. "Doc Pritchard should be here within the hour." Ashford stepped back, giving them space. "Mrs. Calloway will bring up water and towels. Is there anything else you need right now?" "About 1,000 things," but Eliza said, "No." He nodded and moved toward the door, then paused. "The job is real, if you want it. But your sister's health comes first. We can discuss details later." Then he left. Eliza sat on the edge of the bed, suddenly exhausted. Sarah was already half asleep, her body finally relaxing after the long walk. The room was warm, genuinely warm, not the barely above freezing temperature they'd grown accustomed to. "Liza?" Sarah's eyes were closed, but she was still awake. "Are we staying?" "I don't know yet." "I like it here." "You've been here 10 minutes." "I like it anyway." Sarah's breathing was already evening out. "It smells better than home." Home had smelled like mildew and Mrs. Fletcher's cooking and the general staleness of poverty. This place smelled like wood polish and lavender, and something else Eliza couldn't quite identify. Money, maybe. The absence of desperation. Mrs. Calloway arrived with water and towels and a hostility that filled the room like smoke. She set everything down with precise, sharp movements. "Mr. Ashford may be soft-hearted," she said, voice clipped, "but I've been running this household for 20 years and I know trouble when I see it." Eliza met her gaze. "I'm not trouble." "Every saloon girl says that." "I'm not a saloon girl. I'm a waitress who worked in a saloon because it was the only job available." Eliza stood, keeping herself between Mrs. Calloway and Sarah. "And I'm here because your employer offered me a position. If you have a problem with that, take it up with him." Mrs. Calloway's expression hardened. "The housekeeper position is demanding. Early mornings, late nights, no time for laziness or attitude. I've worked 2 jobs for 5 years. I know about long hours." "We'll see." Mrs. Calloway moved toward the door. "Doc Pritchard will arrive shortly. Try not to break anything before then." She left. Sarah rolled over. "She doesn't like us." "She doesn't have to like us. She just has to tolerate us. What's the difference? Eliza didn't have a good answer for that. Doc Pritchard arrived 40 minutes later. He was an older man, practical and efficient, who'd set Sarah's broken wrist 2 years ago and hadn't charged them because he'd known they couldn't pay. He examined Sarah thoroughly while Eliza stood by the window, trying not to hover. Pneumonia, he confirmed, which Eliza already knew. Advanced but treatable. She'll need medication and rest. Proper rest, not working through it rest. Can you give her the medication? Eliza asked. Pritchard pulled a brown bottle from his bag. This should do it. 3 times daily with food. Keep her warm and hydrated. He set the bottle on the bedside table. And keep her here. That room you've been living in would kill her. How much do I owe you? Mr. Ashford's already settled it. The words hit Eliza like cold water. What? The medication, the house call, follow-up visits if needed? Pritchard snapped his bag shut. All paid for. Eliza's hands clenched. I didn't ask him to do that. Well, he did it anyway. Be grateful. Pritchard tipped his hat. I'll check on her in 3 days. After he left, Eliza stood there feeling like the ground had shifted under her feet. She'd come here for a job, for the chance to earn the money Sarah needed. But Ashford had just removed that entire equation, had solved the problem before she'd even agreed to work for him, which meant she owed him now. And owing people was dangerous. Sarah was asleep again, breathing easier already, or maybe that was just wishful thinking. Eliza gave her the first dose of medicine, then went to find Ashford. She found him in the barn, working with a horse that clearly didn't want to cooperate. The animal kept tossing its head, dancing sideways, generally making life difficult. Ashford handled it with patience, speaking low and steady. Easy, he murmured. Nobody's trying to hurt you. Eliza waited until the horse settled before speaking. You paid for the medicine. Ashford didn't look at her, kept his attention on the horse. I did. I didn't ask you to do that. No, you didn't. So why did you? He finally turned to face her. Because your sister needs it and you can't afford it. That's reason enough. Nothing's free, Eliza said. What do you want? Something flickered across his face. Not offense exactly, but something close to it. I want you to accept help when it's offered. That's all. People don't just help for no reason. Some people do. He led the horse into its stall and closed the gate. I'm one of them. Eliza crossed her arms. You don't know me. You don't know Sarah. Why would you spend that kind of money on strangers? You're not strangers. Ashford brushed dirt off his hands. You're the woman who works herself to exhaustion every night at the Rusty Nail, trying to save her sister. That's all I need to know. The sincerity in his voice made her uncomfortable. She didn't know how to argue with kindness, had armored herself against cruelty and indifference, but had no defense against someone who seemed genuinely concerned. I'll work off the debt, she said finally. It's not a debt. Then what is it? Decency. He met her eyes. Something that should be more common and isn't. Eliza wanted to keep arguing, to find the angle he wasn't showing her, the ulterior motive that had to exist. But she was tired, and Sarah was safe for the first time in months, and maybe some fights weren't worth having. About the job, she said instead. You still want it? I need it. Those aren't the same thing. In my world, they are. Eliza straightened her shoulders. $20 a month, room and board for both of us. I'll keep the house, manage the cooking and cleaning, handle whatever else needs doing, but Sarah stays with me. Agreed. Ashford pulled off his work gloves. Mrs. Calloway will show you around, explain the routine. If you need anything, I won't. He smiled slightly. If you need anything, ask. Pride doesn't keep you warm at night. Neither does charity. Good thing this is employment, then. Eliza left before she said something stupid, found her way back to the bedroom where Sarah was still sleeping peacefully. She sat on the edge of the bed and tried to figure out what had just happened. She'd come here expecting a transaction, labor for money, clear and simple. But Ashford had complicated things by being kind, which was worse than if he'd been cruel. Cruelty she understood. Kindness made her suspicious. Mrs. Calloway appeared in the doorway. Mr. Ashford says you're staying. Looks like it. Then we should discuss expectations. Mrs. Calloway entered the room like she was preparing for battle. This household runs on a schedule. Breakfast at 6, lunch at noon, dinner at 7. The house must be cleaned top to bottom once weekly, laundry on Mondays, shopping on Wednesdays, and Mr. Ashford takes his coffee black, his eggs over easy, and doesn't tolerate tardiness. Eliza listened, committing it all to memory. There are ranch hands who eat in the bunkhouse, Mrs. Calloway continued. That's not your concern. You're responsible for the main house and Mr. Ashford's meals. Questions? Where do you fit into all this? Eliza asked. Mrs. Calloway's expression tightened. I'm the head housekeeper. You answer to me. I thought you quit. I'm consulting until a suitable replacement is found. The words dripped with implication. Which won't be you, assuming you last a week. I'll last, Eliza said. We'll see. The first week was brutal. Not because the work was harder than the saloon. Physically, it was easier, actually, without the constant standing and the grabbing hands. But Mrs. Calloway seemed determined to find Eliza's breaking point, assigning tasks with the precision of someone conducting an experiment in human endurance. Polish every piece of silver in the house. Scrub the kitchen floor on hands and knees, wash all the curtains, every window's worth. Beat the dust from every rug. Reorganize the pantry by category and expiration date. Eliza did it all without complaint because complaining meant weakness and weakness meant losing. She woke at 5, worked until midnight, fell into bed beside Sarah, and did it again the next day. Sarah, meanwhile, was getting better. The medicine worked fast, and within 3 days her fever broke. Within a week she was sitting up, eating solid food, laughing at things that weren't even funny. The transformation was so complete it made Eliza's chest ache. I told you we'd be okay, Sarah said one morning, propped up with pillows. You didn't tell me anything. You asked if we'd be okay. Same thing. Eliza was folding laundry, a seemingly endless task. It's really not. You worry too much, Sarah said, then immediately started coughing. The coughing fits were less frequent now, less severe, but they still happened. Each one reminded Eliza how close they'd come, how easily this could have gone differently. Ashford kept his distance, mostly. He took his meals alone in the dining room while Eliza served and cleared. Sometimes he'd thank her. Sometimes he'd ask how Sarah was doing. But he never pushed for conversation, never made her feel like the help was expected to be entertainment. It should have been a relief. Instead, it made her curious. On her 8th day at the ranch, she found him in the library. She'd gone into dust and discovered him sitting by the window, reading. He looked up when she entered. Sorry, she said. I can come back. It's fine. I'm almost finished. He marked his place and set the book aside. How's the work treating you? It's work. That's not an answer. Eliza ran the feather duster along the bookshelf, buying time. Mrs. Calloway doesn't like me. Mrs. Calloway doesn't like anyone. Don't take it personally. She's trying to run me off. I know. Ashford stood and crossed to the window. She's protective of this place. Thinks everyone who comes here is after something. Isn't that usually true? He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Usually, yes. Eliza continued dusting, working her way around the room. The silence stretched, but it wasn't uncomfortable. After a while, Ashford spoke again. Your father worked in the mines. It wasn't a question, but Eliza answered anyway. Yes. The cave-in 5 years ago. Her hands stilled. How do you know that? Small town, he said again, but there was weight behind it this time. Eliza turned to face him. If you know so much about me, why offer me this job? Daughters of dead miners aren't usually your crowd. My crowd. He raised an eyebrow. What crowd is that? Rich people, landowners, the kind who don't worry about where their next meal comes from. You think I don't worry? I think you've never had to. The words came out harder than she intended, edged with years of resentment that had nothing to do with him specifically and everything to do with the unfairness of the world in general. But Ashford didn't get defensive. He just looked at her with those gray eyes that seemed to see too much. You're right, he said quietly. I've never worried about food or shelter or medicine. I was born into money and I'll probably die with it. That makes me lucky, not better. The admission surprised her. But, he continued, having money doesn't mean I don't see what's happening around me. Doesn't mean I think the system is fair or just. He paused. Your father shouldn't have died in that mine. The safety measures were inadequate, everyone knew it. And yet he died anyway, Eliza said. And yet he died anyway, Ashford agreed. They stood there in the library, dust motes floating in the afternoon sun, and for the first time Eliza felt like she was talking to a real person instead of a wealthy stranger. "Why did you really offer me this job?" she asked. Ashford was quiet for a long moment. "Because you asked for one day off and meant it. Because I watched you work yourself into the ground for 5 hours straight and never saw you sit down once. Because your sister is dying and you're trying to save her alone." He met her eyes. "Because I could help, and so I did. Is that so hard to believe?" "Yes," Eliza said honestly. "Then maybe you need to meet better people. Maybe better people need to exist first." He laughed at that, a real laugh, surprised and genuine. "Fair point." Eliza went back to dusting, and Ashford returned to his book, and the rest of the afternoon passed in comfortable quiet. That night, lying in bed with Sarah sleeping peacefully beside her, Eliza realized something unsettling. She was starting to like Colt Ashford, not in a romantic way. She wasn't naive enough to confuse kindness with attraction, and the gulf between their worlds was too wide to bridge with anything as simple as feelings. But she respected him, trusted him even, in a tentative way. And that was dangerous, because trust meant vulnerability, and vulnerability meant someone could hurt you. The second week was easier. Mrs. Calloway still assigned difficult tasks, but Eliza had proven she could handle them. The older woman's hostility softened into something closer to grudging acceptance. "You're not completely incompetent," Mrs. Calloway said one afternoon, inspecting the kitchen. High praise. "Don't let it go to your head." But there was less bite in the words. Sarah was well enough to come downstairs now. She'd sit in the library or the parlor, reading books from Ashford's collection, or just watching the world through the window. The color had returned to her face. She looked like a child again, instead of a ghost. Eliza caught Ashford watching Sarah sometimes, his expression unreadable. Once, she found him teaching her sister to play chess in the library. Sarah was laughing, and Ashford was smiling, and the scene was so domestic it made Eliza's heart twist. "Liza!" Sarah called when she noticed her. "Mr. Ashford is teaching me strategy." "I see that." "She's a quick learner," Ashford said. "She's smart when she wants to be." "I'm smart all the time," Sarah protested. They finished their game. Ashford let her win, Eliza could tell, and then it was time for dinner. Eliza cooked pot roast with vegetables, something hearty and simple. Ashford ate in the dining room as usual, alone. Eliza and Sarah ate in the kitchen. It felt wrong somehow, this separation. Not unjust. She was staff, after all, and staff didn't dine with employers, but lonely in a way she couldn't quite articulate. "Why doesn't Mr. Ashford ever have guests?" Sarah asked, chewing thoughtfully. "I don't know. Not our business. It's sad, though, having this big house and eating alone every night." Eliza hadn't thought of it that way, but Sarah was right. The house was beautiful but empty. No family, no friends, just Ashford and the staff he kept at arm's length. Later that night, after Sarah was asleep, Eliza found herself knocking on the library door. "Come in," Ashford called. He was reading again, same chair by the window. He looked up when she entered, surprised. "Is something wrong?" he asked. "No, I just—" Eliza hesitated. "Sarah asked why you don't have guests. And you want to know if she was being rude?" "I want to know if she was right." Ashford set down his book. "I have guests sometimes. Business associates mostly. But you're right that it's quiet here. By choice? By circumstance." He gestured to the chair across from him. "Sit, if you want." Eliza sat, feeling strange about it. "You don't have to be alone, though. Someone like you could have anyone." "Someone like me?" "Rich, powerful, not terrible looking." He smiled. "Not terrible looking. I'll take that as a compliment." "You know what I mean." "I do." The smile faded. "But wealth makes relationships complicated. People want things from you, money, status, connections. It's hard to know who actually likes you versus who likes what you can provide. So you just stay alone? It's simpler." Eliza understood that more than she wanted to admit. Hadn't she kept people at distance too? Avoided friendships because getting close meant risking loss? "That's a lonely way to live," she said. "So is working yourself to death in a saloon." "That wasn't by choice." "Wasn't it?" Ashford leaned forward. "You could have asked for help. Could have gone to the church or reached out to neighbors and become charity? Eliza shook her head. I've taken care of Sarah since our father died. We didn't need anyone's pity. Pride and loneliness, Ashford said. We're more alike than you think. The observation sat between them, uncomfortable and true. Well, Eliza stood. I should let you read. Eliza, she stopped. Thank you, he said, for asking. No one usually does. She nodded and left, but the conversation stayed with her. Over the following weeks, something shifted. Small things, barely noticeable. Ashford started taking meals in the kitchen instead of the dining room, saying the formal space felt ridiculous for one person. Sarah would chatter through dinner while Eliza cooked, and sometimes Ashford would join the conversation, adding dry observations that made Sarah laugh. He taught Sarah more chess, started lending her books, asked her opinion on things like whether the foal born last week should be named Thunder or Storm. Thunder, Sarah declared. Storm is too obvious. Thunder it is, then. Eliza watched these interactions with mixed feelings. Gratitude, yes. Sarah deserved kindness, but also wariness, because getting comfortable meant forgetting this was temporary. Eventually, Mrs. Calloway would return full-time, or Ashford would tire of having staff living in his house, or something would change. Nothing good lasted forever. But for now, it was good. Sarah was healthy. They had food, warmth, safety. Eliza was earning money, actual money that she could save instead of spending immediately on survival. The coffee tin under the floorboard back at Fletcher's had been abandoned. Now she had a real savings account at the bank in town. Life had stopped being a constant emergency, and that terrified her almost as much as poverty had, because she didn't know how to live without crisis, didn't know how to be a person instead of a survival mechanism. One evening in late December, after Sarah had gone to bed, Eliza found Ashford on the back porch. Snow was falling, light and lazy, covering the ranch in white. Can't sleep? She asked. Thinking, he said. She leaned against the porch railing beside him. About what? Whether I'm doing the right thing. With what? He looked at her. With you, with Sarah. Mrs. Calloway thinks I'm being foolish, having you here. Eliza's stomach dropped. Are you firing us? No. He said it quickly, firmly. No, that's not what I meant. He ran a hand through his hair, frustrated. I don't want you to feel trapped here, like you owe me something you can't repay. I work for you. That's the repayment. Is it enough, though? Do you feel like we're even? Eliza considered the question. The medicine alone had cost more than she made in 2 months. The room, the food, the safety, all of it was worth more than housekeeping could ever compensate for. No, she admitted, we're not even, and we probably never will be. Ashford's expression tightened. But, Eliza continued, I'm choosing to be okay with that, because Sarah's alive, and that's worth more than my pride. I don't want your pride, Ashford said quietly. I just want you to be okay. The sincerity in his voice made her chest tight. Why? She asked. Why do you care so much? He was quiet for a long time, watching the snow fall. When he finally spoke, his voice was low. Because 5 years ago, people died in a mine that didn't have to collapse. And the people responsible, my family included, walked away without consequences. He turned to face her. Your father was one of those men, and I can't fix that. Can't bring him back. But I can help his daughters. So I am. The words hit Eliza like a physical blow. Your family? The question came out strangled. The mine was on Ashford land. My father owned a stake in the operation. Ashford's jaw tightened. When it collapsed, he buried the safety reports, paid off the investigators, made sure no one looked too closely at why it happened. Eliza couldn't breathe. He died 2 years ago, Ashford continued. Heart attack. Left me everything, including the guilt. The world tilted. All this time, the kindness, the help, the job, it had been guilt. Payment for blood. So that's what this is? Eliza heard herself say. You're trying to buy forgiveness? I'm trying to do better than he did. By hiring the daughter of a man your family killed? By helping someone who needs it, Ashford said. Yes, there's guilt involved, But that doesn't make the help less real. Eliza backed away from him, shaking. You should have told me. When? The first night in the saloon? The day you arrived desperate for medicine? His voice rose slightly. When was the right time to say my father helped kill yours? Before you made me trust you. The words hung in the air, raw and honest. Ashford flinched. Eliza, don't. She held up a hand. Just don't. She turned and walked inside, leaving him standing alone in the snow. In the bedroom, Sarah was asleep, peaceful and healthy, and utterly unaware that the foundation of their new life had just cracked wide open. Eliza sat on the edge of the bed, hands shaking. She should leave, should pack their things and walk out tonight, get as far from Colt Ashford and his blood money as possible. But where would they go? Back to the room above Fletcher's hardware? Back to the rusty nail and 12-hour shifts and watching Sarah slowly die? She'd come here out of desperation. She'd stayed because it was working. And now she had to decide, was her father's memory worth more than her sister's life? The answer should have been simple, but nothing about this was simple anymore. Eliza didn't sleep that night. She lay beside Sarah, watching the ceiling and trying to untangle the knot in her chest. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw her father's face. Not as he'd looked in the casket, broken and wrong, but as he'd been before, smiling, alive, teaching her to skip stones at the creek, telling her she was brave enough to do anything. He'd been wrong about that. She wasn't brave. She was just stubborn, and there was a difference. Morning came gray and cold. Sarah woke coughing, though it was mild now, nothing like the wet, desperate sound from weeks ago. Eliza gave her the medicine. They were almost done with the bottle, thank everything, and helped her dress. You look tired, Sarah said, studying her face. I'm fine. You always say that, because it's always true. Eliza pulled Sarah's hair into a braid, fingers moving automatically. What do you want for breakfast? Whatever's easy. You don't have to. I'm asking what you want, not what's convenient. Sarah twisted to look at her. Are you mad at me? What? No. Eliza tied off the braid. Why would I be mad at you? You have that look, the one you get when you're upset but pretending you're not. Sometimes Eliza forgot how perceptive her sister was. Sarah had learned to read people the same way Eliza had, survival skill developed through necessity. I'm not mad, Eliza said, softer. I'm just thinking. About what? About whether they should stay here. About whether kindness built on guilt was still kindness. About whether she could look at Colt Ashford without seeing her father's death in his eyes. Nothing important, she lied. Come on, let's get you fed. Downstairs, the kitchen was empty. Usually Mrs. Calloway was already up, starting the day with the kind of militant efficiency that made Eliza feel perpetually behind. But the older woman had gone to visit her sister in Cheyenne for a week, leaving Eliza to manage alone, which meant no buffer between her and Ashford. She started breakfast, eggs, bacon, biscuits, simple, mechanical work that didn't require thought. Sarah sat at the table, drawing on scrap paper with a pencil she'd found somewhere. Can I ask you something? Sarah said after a while. You just did. A real question, smart mouth. Eliza smiled despite herself. Go ahead. Do you like it here? The question was innocent enough, but it landed heavy. Why do you ask? Because you seem different, less tired. Sarah kept her eyes on her drawing, but also more worried. I can't figure it out. Eliza cracked eggs into the pan, watching them sizzle. It's complicated. You always say things are complicated when you don't want to explain. Maybe things are always complicated. Or maybe you think I'm too young to understand. Sarah looked up, and her eyes were older than 12. I'm not, you know. Too young, I mean. I know we're here because I was sick and you couldn't afford medicine. I know Mr. Ashford paid for it when he didn't have to, and I know that makes you uncomfortable because you hate owing people. Eliza turned from the stove. When did you get so smart? I've always been smart. You just never notice because you're busy taking care of everything. The words hit harder than Sarah probably intended, because it was true. Eliza had been so focused on survival that she'd stopped seeing her sister as a person with thoughts and observations, had reduced her to a problem that needed solving. I'm sorry, Eliza said quietly. For what? For not asking what you think about any of this. Sarah shrugged. You were keeping me alive. That seems more important than my opinion. Your opinion matters. Eliza plated the eggs, brought them to the table. So here's me asking, do you want to stay? Sarah considered the question seriously, chewing her bacon. Yeah, she said finally. I do. Mr. Ashford is nice, the house is warm, and you smile more here, even when you're trying not to. I smile. Not like you do here. Here it's real. Eliza opened her mouth to argue, then closed it. Because Sarah was right again. She had been smiling more, had felt something ease in her chest over the past weeks, some tension she'd carried so long she'd forgotten it wasn't natural. But that was before last night, before she'd learned that the foundation of their new life was built on her father's grave. The kitchen door opened and Ashford walked in. He stopped when he saw them, clearly not expecting company. Morning, he said carefully. Morning, Sarah replied cheerfully. Want some eggs? I don't want to intrude. You're not intruding. You live here. Sarah gestured to the empty chair. Sit. Liza made extra. Eliza hadn't made extra, but there was enough. She got another plate without comment, served him, and sat back down at the opposite end of the table. The silence was thick enough to cut. Sarah, bless her, seemed oblivious. She chattered about the book she was reading, about whether Thunder the Foal would grow up to be fast, about how she thought it might snow again today. Ashford responded when appropriate, but his attention kept drifting to Eliza. She could feel his gaze, could sense the questions he wasn't asking. Finally, Sarah finished eating and excused herself, leaving them alone. The silence got worse. Eliza, Ashford started. Don't. She stood, began clearing dishes. I don't want to talk about it. We have to talk about it. Why? What's there to say? She turned to face him. Your father helped kill mine. You feel guilty. You offered me a job to ease your conscience. That about sum it up? Ashford's jaw tightened. That's reductive. But is it wrong? He stood, came around the table, not close enough to crowd her, but close enough that she had to look at him. My father was a lot of things. Ambitious, ruthless, willing to cut corners if it meant profit. When the mine collapsed, he had a choice, own the negligence or bury it. He chose wrong. And you? I'm trying to choose right. By hiring me? Eliza laughed, bitter. You think that makes up for it? You think a job and some medicine balances the scales? No. His voice was quiet but firm. Nothing balances the scales. Your father is dead because men like mine value money over lives. That's not something I can fix. But I can help his daughters, and I can make sure it doesn't happen again. How? The mines on Ashford land now have the best safety standards in the territory. I hired independent inspectors. Anyone who reports a hazard gets heard, not silenced. He met her eyes. I can't undo the past, but I can do better going forward. Eliza wanted to stay angry. Anger was easier than this complicated mess of emotions she couldn't name, but the sincerity in Ashford's voice made it hard. Why didn't you tell me sooner? She asked. Because I'm a coward. The admission came out flat. I knew if I told you, you'd leave, and I didn't want you to leave. Why not? You could hire anyone. I didn't want anyone. I wanted you. The words hung between them, meaning too many things at once. Eliza's heart kicked against her ribs. That's not fair. I know. You can't just... She broke off, frustrated. I don't know how to do this. Do what? Trust you, hate you, both at the same time. Ashford's expression softened. You don't have to decide right now. Take whatever time you need. And if I decide to leave? Pain flickered across his face, but he nodded. Then I'll help you find somewhere safe to go. No strings. The answer surprised her. She'd expected him to argue, to convince, to leverage her situation. But he was offering her a choice, which was more than most men did. I need to think, she said finally. Take all the time you need. He left the kitchen, and Eliza stood there among the dirty dishes, trying to figure out what she felt. The next few days were strange. Eliza worked because routine was easier than thinking. She cleaned rooms that didn't need cleaning, reorganized pantries that were already organized, found tasks to fill the hours. Sarah noticed, of course, but didn't comment. Ashford gave her space. He took his meals in the dining room again, stopped coming to the kitchen, made himself scarce. It should have been a relief. Instead, it felt like loss, which was stupid. She barely knew the man, had only been here a few weeks. Whatever connection she'd felt, respect, trust, that dangerous thing that might have been the beginning of something more, it was built on a lie. Not his lie exactly, but close enough. On the fourth day, Eliza walked into town. It was the first time she'd left the ranch since arriving, and the distance felt surreal. Red Hollow looked the same. Shabby buildings, muddy streets, the Rusty Nail Saloon standing like a monument to her old life. She went to the general store first. Mrs. Henderson looked up when the bell chimed. Eliza Vance. Her tone was neutral, which was better than hostile. Heard you were working at the Ashford ranch. News travels fast. Only kind of news there is in Red Hollow. Mrs. Henderson set down the inventory sheet she'd been checking. How's your sister? Better, much better. Good. A pause. Tom Early's been asking after you. Says you can have your job back at the saloon if you want it. Eliza's stomach sank. You say why? Said you were a good worker, hard to replace. Mrs. Henderson's expression suggested she knew there was more to it than that. Though between you and me, I'd stay where you are. Ashford's reputation is solid. Can't say the same for Tom Early's hands. The comment landed like a slap. Eliza had never told anyone about the grabbing, the comments, the way Tom looked the other way when customers got too friendly. But apparently it hadn't been as invisible as she'd thought. Thanks for the advice, Eliza said. Don't thank me, just stating facts. Mrs. Henderson went back to her inventory. You need anything else? Just looking. Eliza wandered the store, not buying anything, just existing in a space that used to be familiar. Through the window, she could see the hardware store where she and Sarah had lived. The stairs looked worse than she remembered, the building more decrepit. Had it always been that bad? Or had she just gotten used to something better? She left the store and walked to the cemetery. Her father's grave was near the back, marked by a simple wooden cross that was starting to rot. She'd carved his name herself 5 years ago, letters uneven but readable. Matthew Vance, beloved father. Eliza knelt in the dirt. I don't know what to do, she said quietly. I'm so angry at what happened to you, at the people who let it happen. But one of those people is trying to help us now, and I don't know if that makes it better or worse. The wind rustled through the grass. No answer came because dead men didn't speak. Sarah's doing well, she continued. She's healthy, happy. She likes it at the ranch, likes Ashford, even though she doesn't know what his family did. Should she tell Sarah? The thought had been circling her mind for days. Her sister deserved to know. But she was also 12 and finally healing from years of hardship. Did she need that weight on top of everything else? I think you'd like him, Eliza said. Ashford, I mean. He's not like his father. He's trying to do right, even though it won't change anything. She touched the wooden cross, fingers tracing the letters of her father's name. But that doesn't bring you back, and I don't know if I can forgive that. She sat there until her knees ached, trying to feel some kind of guidance or peace or closure. But there was just wind and dead grass and the weight of impossible choices. Finally, she stood. I miss you, she said, every day. Then she walked back to the ranch. Ashford was in the barn when she returned, working with Thunder. The foal was growing fast, all long legs and curiosity. He'd approach the fence, then dance away, testing boundaries. He's stubborn, Ashford said without looking at her. Reminds me of someone. Horses can't be stubborn. That's just personality. People can't either then. Liza leaned against the fence, watching Thunder investigate a bucket. I went to town. I noticed. Visited my father's grave. Ashford's hand stilled on the brush he was using. How was it? Quiet. She paused. He can't tell me what to do. Can't give me permission to stay or order me to leave. So I have to decide myself. And? Eliza took a breath. This was it. The moment that would determine everything that came next. I'm angry, she said, at your father, at the men who chose money over safety, at a system that lets people like them walk away while people like my father die. You should be angry. But I'm not angry at you. The words came out quieter than she intended. You weren't responsible for what happened, and you're trying to make things better, which is more than most people do. Ashford turned to face her. So you'll stay? On one condition. Name it. No more secrets. She met his eyes. If there's something I should know about your family, about the mines, about anything, you tell me. I can't trust you if you're hiding things. That's fair. He nodded slowly. I agree. And I need you to do something else. What? Eliza had thought about this on the walk back from town, turning the idea over until it felt solid. Make it public. What your father did. The safety violations, the cover-up, all of it. Ashford went very still. That would destroy my family's reputation. Good. Eliza, you said you wanted to do better. Prove it. She pushed off the fence, stood straight. Clear my father's name, clear all their names, show people that what happened wasn't their fault, wasn't just bad luck. Make sure everyone knows your father chose profit over lives. It'll cost me. His voice was strained. Business relationships, social standing, maybe the ranch itself if the lawsuits come. Is that too high a price? The question hung in the cold air. Ashford looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, No, you're right. It needs to be done. Eliza hadn't expected him to agree so readily. She'd thought she'd have to fight, to convince, to bargain. But he'd just agreed. When? She asked. I'll start making arrangements this week, gathering the documents, finding a lawyer who won't bury it. He ran a hand through his hair. It won't be fast. These things take time. I can wait. And you'll stay while I do this? Eliza considered. Trust had to start somewhere, and maybe this was as good a place as any. Yeah, she said. I'll stay. Something in Ashford's expression cracked open, relief and gratitude, and something else she couldn't quite name. He took a step toward her, then stopped, like he'd remembered himself. Thank you, he said quietly. Don't thank me yet. This is going to hurt. I know. Your family's name is just a name, and names can be rebuilt. He looked at Thunder, who was now chewing on the fence. My father left me a legacy of wealth and guilt. I'd rather have less of the former and none of the latter. Eliza found herself smiling. You're either very brave or very stupid. Can't I be both? I guess that's up to you. They stood there as the barn, afternoon sun slanting through the gaps in the wood, and something settled between them. Not forgiveness. That would take time, if it came at all. But understanding, maybe. The beginning of something that could become trust. Over the following weeks, Ashford kept his word. He brought in lawyers from Cheyenne, men who wore expensive suits and asked uncomfortable questions. They went through old documents, interviewed miners who'd survived the collapse, compiled evidence of negligence. Eliza watched it happen from the margins. She'd serve coffee during the meetings, catch fragments of conversation about liability and damages and statutes of limitations. The lawyers kept looking at Ashford like he'd lost his mind, voluntarily destroying his family's legacy for the sake of truth. Maybe he had, but Eliza found herself respecting him more for it. Sarah, meanwhile, remained blissfully unaware of the larger drama. She'd regained her health completely, was putting on weight, had color in her cheeks again. She spent her days reading, helping with light chores, playing with Thunder when Ashford allowed it. He's going to be the fastest horse in the territory, she declared one afternoon, watching the foal run circles in the paddock. He's going to be spoiled, Eliza corrected. You keep sneaking him apples. He likes apples. Everyone likes apples, doesn't mean they should have them every day. Sarah grinned, unrepentant. You're just mad because you didn't think of it first. I'm mad because Mrs. Calloway counted the pantry yesterday and asked where 3 pounds of apples went. What did you tell her? That I'd been making pies. Did she believe you? No, but she couldn't prove otherwise. Eliza nudged her sister. Don't make me a liar, Bug. The horse will survive without constant treats. Fine. Sarah sighed dramatically. But he's going to miss me. He'll recover. They walked back to the house together, Sarah chattering about something she'd read, Eliza only half listening. The ranch had become familiar in a way that both comforted and worried her. Comfortable meant attachment, and attachment meant it would hurt when things inevitably changed. Because things always changed. That night, Ashford asked her to join him in the library. She found him standing by the fireplace holding a sheaf of papers. The lawyers finished the preliminary report, he said. Eliza's pulse quickened. And? It's bad. Worse than I thought. He handed her the papers. 37 safety violations in the 6 months before the collapse. My father knew about every single one, chose to keep operating anyway. Eliza read through the list, each violation a small choice that added up to disaster. Insufficient support beams, poor ventilation, no emergency exits, warning signs ignored. Her father's death hadn't been an accident, it had been inevitable. How many died? She asked, voice hollow. 18. Ashford's face was gray. 18 men because my father wanted to squeeze another month of profit before shutting down for repairs. Eliza set down the papers before her hands started shaking. What happens now? I'm going public. Newspaper statement. Testimony to the Territorial Mining Board, compensation to the families. He paused. It's going to get ugly. I know. People are going to ask why I'm doing this. They're going to assume... He stopped, jaw tight. Assume what? That you're the reason, that I'm trying to, I don't know, win you over, or buy forgiveness, or something equally crude. He wasn't wrong. Red Hollow thrived on gossip, and this would be the best gossip in years. Rich rancher destroys his own family's reputation for a saloon waitress he'd hired. The story would write itself. Let them talk, Eliza said. You're doing this because it's right. That's all that matters. Is it? Ashford looked at her, and his expression was raw. Because I need you to know, this isn't about winning anything. I'm not trying to earn your affection or convince you to stay or leverage this into something it's not. Then what is it about? It's about being able to look at myself in the mirror, about making sure what happened to your father doesn't happen to anyone else, about choosing the kind of man I want to be instead of accepting the one I inherited. The honesty in his voice hit her square in the chest. Okay, she said quietly. Then do it, and whatever comes after, we'll handle it. We? The word had slipped out, but Eliza didn't take it back. Yeah, we. You're not alone in this. Something shifted in Ashford's face, gratitude and hope, and something that looked almost like wonder. He crossed to her, stopped just close enough that she could feel the warmth of him. I don't deserve you, he said. You're right, you don't. She smiled slightly. But you're trying to. That counts for something. He reached out, hesitated, then gently tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. The gesture was simple, almost innocent, but it sent heat through her entire body. Eliza, he said, voice low, don't. She stepped back, not because she wanted to, but because she had to. We can't, not yet. Not until this is done. I know. He dropped his hand. I just needed you to know. I know. And she did. Could see it in the way he looked at her, the way he'd been looking at her for weeks now. Whatever this was between them, it was real. Complicated and messy and built on foundations of grief and guilt, but real. And that terrified her. The announcement came 3 days later. Ashford published a statement in the Red Hollow Gazette and the Cheyenne papers, laying out everything. The violations, the cover-up, his father's negligence. He named names, provided documentation, offered compensation to the families of the men who'd died. The reaction was immediate and explosive. Some people praised him for his honesty. More condemned him for betraying his family. Business partners withdrew contracts. Social invitations stopped coming. The Ashford name, which had opened doors across the territory, became a liability overnight. Eliza watched it happen with a mixture of satisfaction and guilt. This was what she'd asked for: justice, truth, accountability. But watching Ashford pay the price made her chest tight. You can stop, she told him one evening after another letter arrived canceling a cattle contract. You've done enough. This isn't about enough. He set the letter aside. This is about right. Right doesn't pay the bills. The ranch is fine. We have savings. He met her eyes. I'm not going to stop because it's inconvenient. You're losing everything. I'm losing a reputation built on lies. That's not everything. He stood, came to where she was standing. You and Sarah are healthy. The workers are safe. I can sleep at night. That's everything. Eliza didn't know what to say to that. Mrs. Calloway returned from Cheyenne and was predictably horrified by what she'd missed. She cornered Eliza in the kitchen within an hour of arriving. "You did this," she accused. "I asked him to tell the truth. He agreed." "You've ruined him." "His father ruined him. I just made it visible." Mrs. Calloway's expression was ice. "You think you're helping. You think this is justice. But all you've done is destroy a good man's future for the sake of ghosts." The words stung because there was truth in them. Eliza had demanded this knowing it would hurt Ashford, had asked him to sacrifice everything for people who were already dead. Was that justice? Or just revenge dressed up in righteous language? That night, lying next to Sarah, she stared at the ceiling and wondered what her father would think. Would he be proud she'd demanded accountability? Or would he tell her to let the dead rest and focus on the living? She'd never know. The lawsuits started 2 weeks later. Families of the dead miners filed claims against the Ashford estate, seeking compensation for wrongful death. The lawyers Ashford had hired helped facilitate it, providing evidence, testimony, documentation. It was financial devastation in slow motion. Eliza found Ashford in his office late one night, surrounded by papers, looking exhausted. "How bad?" she asked. "Bad enough that I'll probably have to sell land. Maybe part of the herd." He rubbed his eyes. "But we'll survive." "Is it worth it?" He looked at her, and despite everything, the stress, the financial ruin, and the social exile, he smiled. "Yeah," he said, "it is." And Eliza, standing in the doorway of an office in a house that had become home, realized she believed him. The settlements came through in early spring. 18 families, 18 checks that wouldn't bring back the dead, but might ease the burden of living without them. Eliza watched Ashford sign each one with a steady hand, his expression unreadable. "That's the last of it," the lawyer said, gathering the papers. "The mining board has also mandated inspections across the territory. Your testimony made the difference." After the lawyer left, Ashford sat at his desk for a long time, staring at nothing. Eliza brought him coffee. "You okay?" "I don't know." He took the cup but didn't drink. "I thought I'd feel better, like I'd done something meaningful." "You did." "Then why does it feel like it's not enough?" Eliza sat in the chair across from him. "Because it's not. Nothing can be enough. That's the point." She paused. "But it's still more than anyone else did." He finally looked at her. "The Hendersons are using their settlement to buy a house. Did you know that? Mrs. Henderson came by yesterday to thank me. Her husband died in that collapse, and she's been renting above the bakery for 5 years." "That's good." "It is." He set down the coffee. "But it doesn't change the fact that her husband is still dead, that she spent 5 years struggling because my father valued money over lives." "No, it doesn't change that." Eliza leaned forward. "But her kids will grow up in a house instead of a rented room. That matters. It won't fix the past, but it changes the future." Ashford was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "When did you get so wise?" "I'm not wise. I'm just tired of being angry all the time." She stood. "Come on, you've been in here for 6 hours. Sarah made dinner and she'll be offended if you don't show up." "Sarah made dinner?" "Well, I supervised, but she did most of the work." Eliza smiled slightly. "It's edible. Probably." That got a small laugh out of him. High praise. In the kitchen, Sarah had indeed made dinner, roasted chicken with vegetables, slightly burned but enthusiastic. She'd even set the table with the good plates, which Mrs. Calloway would probably have opinions about later. "It looks wonderful," Ashford said, and Sarah beamed. They ate together, the three of them, talking about small things. Thunder had jumped a fence that morning. Mrs. Calloway was scandalized by the state of the linen closet. Sarah had finished another book and wanted to know if Ashford had anything else about explorers. It was normal, domestic, the kind of evening Eliza had stopped believing was possible. After dinner, Sarah excused herself to read, leaving Eliza and Ashford alone with the dishes. "I can handle these," Eliza said. "So can I." Ashford picked up a towel. "I'll dry." They worked in comfortable silence for a while. Then Ashford said, "The ranch is going to be different now." "Different how?" "Smaller. I'm selling the north pasture to cover the settlements, cutting back the herd." He dried a plate carefully. "We'll be fine, but it won't be what it was." "Does that bother you?" "No." He set the plate aside. "What bothers me is wondering if I'm doing this for the right reasons or if I'm just trying to prove something to you." Eliza's hand stilled in the wash water. What do you mean? I mean, maybe Mrs. Calloway was right. Maybe I destroyed everything because I was trying to win your approval. Is that what you think you're doing? I don't know. He turned to face her. I look at you and I see someone who's survived things I can't imagine, who's kept going when most people would have quit. And I want to be worthy of that strength. Want to be the kind of man who deserves your respect. Colt, let me finish. He set down the towel. But I also know that's not fair to you. You didn't ask to be the measure of my worth, didn't sign up to be the reason I dismantle my family's legacy. Eliza dried her hands on her apron, buying time to think. You want to know what I think? Always. I think you're making this too complicated. She met his eyes. You did the right thing because it was right. Not for me, not to prove anything. You did it because you looked at what your father had done and decided you wanted to be different. She paused. That's not about me. That's about who you are. But you're the one who asked me to do it. And you could have said no. Could have offered me money, a better job, whatever else would keep me here without risking everything. Eliza stepped closer. But you didn't. You chose the hard path because you believed it was necessary. That's on you, not me. Ashford's expression was raw. I need you to know something. What? Whatever this is between us, and there is something between us, don't pretend there isn't. I'm not going to ask you for anything until you're ready. No pressure, no expectations. You've had enough people in your life demanding things from you. The declaration made her chest tight. Because he was right. There was something between them. Had been since that first night in the saloon, maybe. Or perhaps it had grown slowly over shared meals and quiet conversations and the gradual building of trust. But naming it felt dangerous. I don't know what I'm ready for, Eliza admitted. That's okay. Take your time. He smiled, but there was sadness in it. I'm not going anywhere. The town's reaction to the settlements was mixed. Some people, mostly the miners and their families, were grateful. They spoke well of Ashford, called him honest, said he'd done more than anyone had a right to expect. But the wealthy families, the landowners, the people who'd benefited from the old system, they were less forgiving. Eliza heard the gossip when she went to town for supplies, heard herself called a gold digger, a manipulator, the scheming saloon girl who'd seduced a good man into destroying himself. Heard Ashford called a fool, a traitor to his class, too weak to stand up to a woman. It stung more than she wanted to admit. She was loading supplies into the wagon when Frank Morrison appeared. He looked the same as he had at the Rusty Nail, thick-bodied and mean-eyed, the kind of man who measured his worth by how much smaller he could make everyone else feel. Heard you landed yourself a rich man, he said. Eliza kept loading. I work for Mr. Ashford, that's all. That's not what people are saying. He moved closer, crowding her space. They're saying you got him wrapped around your finger, convinced him to throw away his family's good name. Then people should mind their own business. Hard to mind your business when you're making a spectacle. Frank leaned against the wagon. Ashford's always been soft, but even I didn't think he'd be stupid enough to ruin himself for a piece of, finish that sentence and you'll regret it. The voice came from behind them. Eliza turned to see Ashford standing there, expression cold as winter. Frank straightened. Just making conversation. No, you were being crude. There's a difference. Ashford's voice was quiet but edged with steel. Apologize to Miss Vance. I don't see why I should. Apologize, or I'll make sure every ranch in 3 counties knows you're not welcome on Ashford land, which means you're out of work, since the Triple Creek contracts with us for feed and equipment. Frank's face went red. For a moment, Eliza thought he might swing, but he must have done the math, calculated what defiance would cost, because he bit out, Sorry, Miss Vance. Now leave, Ashford said. Frank left, shoulders tight with humiliation. Eliza let out a breath. You didn't have to do that. Yes, I did. Ashford checked the supplies in the wagon. You need help loading the rest? I can manage. I know you can. I'm asking if you want help. She studied his face, the jaw still tight with anger, the protectiveness he wasn't bothering to hide. Yeah, I want help. They finished loading together. As they worked, Eliza said, It's going to keep happening. People talking, making assumptions. Let them. Doesn't it bother you? Not as much as letting them treat you badly does. He lifted the last bag into the wagon. I made my choices knowing what it would cost. The gossip is part of that. On the ride back to the ranch, Eliza thought about what Frank had said, about being wrapped around someone's finger, about making spectacles. Was that what she was doing? Using Ashford's guilt and attraction to remake him into something that satisfied her need for justice? She didn't think so, but the doubt lingered. Sarah was waiting on the porch when they arrived. Mrs. Calloway is in a mood, she warned. Something about the good silver being tarnished. The good silver is always tarnished, Eliza said. That's why it needs polishing. I think she's just looking for something to be mad about. Sarah was probably right. Mrs. Calloway had been increasingly brittle since Ashford's public confession, like she was watching something precious crumble and couldn't stop it. Inside, the housekeeper was indeed in the dining room, examining silverware with the intensity of a jeweler appraising diamonds. "This is unacceptable," she said without preamble. "The service has been neglected." Eliza bit back a sharp response. "I polished it last week." Poorly, evidently. Mrs. Calloway set down a fork with precise displeasure. "Standards have fallen considerably. Then perhaps you should resume your duties full-time," Ashford said from the doorway, "since Eliza's work is clearly beneath your expectations." Mrs. Calloway's spine went rigid. "Mr. Ashford, I didn't mean—" "You meant exactly what you said, that Eliza isn't good enough." He crossed his arms. "Well, I disagree. She's been managing this household for months while you were away, and she's done it well. If the silver needs more polishing, then show her your preferred method instead of criticizing from the sidelines." The room went very quiet. Mrs. Calloway's face was unreadable. Finally, she said, "Of course, sir. My apologies." She left the dining room with her dignity intact, but her authority diminished. Eliza waited until she was gone before saying, "You didn't have to do that either. Are we going to have this conversation every time I defend you?" "Maybe until I stop being surprised by it." Ashford smiled. "Then we'll probably be having it for a while." That evening, Eliza found Sarah on the back porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. "Can I tell you something?" Sarah asked. "Always." "I'm happy here." Sarah hugged her knees. "I know we didn't plan to stay this long, and I know things with Mr. Ashford are complicated because of Dad, but I'm happy anyway." Eliza sat beside her. "That's okay. You're allowed to be happy." "Are you?" The question caught her off guard. "What? Are you happy?" Sarah looked at her seriously. "Because you seem like you're waiting for something bad to happen." "I'm not—" Eliza stopped, because Sarah was right again. She had been waiting for the other shoe to drop, for this temporary safety to dissolve like every other good thing in her life. "I'm working on it," she said finally. "Mr. Ashford likes you," Sarah said. "Like, really likes you. You know that, right?" "Sarah, I'm not a baby. I see how he looks at you." Sarah bumped her shoulder. "And I see how you look at him when you think no one's watching. It's complicated." "You always say that." Sarah turned back to the sunset. "But maybe it's only complicated because you're making it that way." Out of the mouths of 12-year-olds. Later, after Sarah had gone to bed, Eliza found herself wandering the house. She ended up in the library, where Ashford was reading by lamplight. He looked up when she entered. "Can't sleep?" "Too much thinking." She sat in the chair across from him. "Sarah says I'm making things complicated." "Are you?" "Probably." Eliza traced the arm of the chair. "I've spent 5 years keeping everything simple. Work, survive, protect Sarah. No room for anything else." "And now?" "Now Sarah's safe. The work is stable. And I have space to think about things I've been avoiding." "Like what?" "Like the way her heart kicked when he smiled. Like how natural it felt to sit here talking to him. Like the fact that somewhere along the way this house had stopped being a job and started being home. Like the future," she said instead. "I've never been able to think past next week before." Ashford set down his book. "What does your future look like?" "I don't know." "That's the problem." She met his eyes. "What does yours look like?" "Honestly?" He leaned back. "It looks like this. The ranch, smaller but sustainable. Work that matters. People around me who I trust." A pause. "You and Sarah, if you'll stay. As your housekeeper. As whatever you want to be." The words hung in the air, heavy with implication. Eliza's pulse quickened. "Colt, I'm not asking for anything," he said quickly. "I'm just telling you what I want. You can do whatever you want with that information." She should leave, should go to bed and think about this rationally, when her heart wasn't pounding and his eyes weren't making her forget all the reasons this was a bad idea. Instead, she heard herself say, "What if I don't know what I want? Then we figure it out together." He stood, crossed to her chair, knelt so they were eye level. "I know this is complicated. I know my family's guilt will always be there, but I also know that you're the strongest, bravest, most remarkable person I've ever met, and I'd like the chance to see where this goes, if you're willing." Eliza's breath caught, because this was it, the moment where she either trusted this or walked away, where she chose safety or risk, the known or the unknown. She thought about her father, about the years of grief and anger and survival, thought about Sarah, healthy and happy, thought about herself, worn down by life, but still here, still fighting. And she thought about Colt Ashford, who dismantled his own legacy because she'd asked him to, who defended her to gossips and critics, who looked at her like she was worth something more than what she could provide. "I'm scared," she admitted. "So am I." What if this doesn't work? What if it does? The simplicity of the question broke something loose in her chest, because yes, it might not work. Relationships failed all the time, especially ones built on foundations this shaky, but it might work. And wasn't that possibility worth the risk? She leaned forward and kissed him. It was tentative at first, a question more than a statement. But then his hand came up to cup her face, and she leaned into it, into him, into this terrifying, vulnerable thing she'd been avoiding. When they broke apart, Ashford was smiling. "So that's a yes? That's a maybe." But she was smiling too. "Ask me again in a month." "I can do that." They sat there in the library, hands linked, talking about small things and large ones until the lamp burned low. And for the first time in years, Eliza let herself imagine a future that wasn't just about survival. The next morning, Mrs. Calloway handed in her resignation. "It's nothing personal," she said, though her tone suggested otherwise. "But I've been offered a position in Denver, better pay, less drama." Ashford accepted it gracefully. "I understand. Thank you for your years of service." After she left, Sarah whispered, "She didn't like the changes." "No," Eliza agreed. "She didn't." "Are we the changes?" "Yeah, Bug, we are." Sarah considered this. Good. Her silver polishing standards were unreasonable anyway. With Mrs. Calloway gone, the house felt different, lighter somehow. Eliza took over the head housekeeper role officially, which came with a raise and more responsibility. She hired 2 girls from town to help with the heavy work, both daughters of miners who died in the collapse. It felt right. The ranch settled into a new rhythm. Smaller, yes, but more honest. Ashford spent less time managing business relationships that no longer existed and more time actually working the land. He was happier for it, Eliza could tell. They were all happier. One evening in late May, Ashford found Eliza in the garden she'd started behind the house. She was planting vegetables, dirt under her fingernails, hair falling out of its pins. "I have a question," he said. "Just one? For now." He sat on the garden wall. "It's been a month." Eliza's hands stilled in the dirt. "It has." "So I'm asking again." He smiled. "Will you give this a real chance? Not as my housekeeper or because you feel obligated, but because you want to." She sat back on her heels, looking at him. At this man who'd chosen integrity over comfort, who'd protected her and her sister, who'd proven again and again that he was worth trusting. "Yeah," she said, "I want to." His smile could have lit the whole territory. "But," Eliza added, "we're taking it slow. Sarah's still young, and she doesn't need to see us rushing into anything. Slow is fine. I've waited this long. And people are still going to talk. Let them. And your reputation is ruined. I've got a better one now, built on truth instead of lies." He held out his hand. "Come here." She took it, let him pull her up. They stood there in the garden, spring sun warm on their faces, and Eliza felt something she hadn't felt in years. Peace. "Thank you," she said quietly. "For what?" "For listening. That first night when I said I wanted one day off." She squeezed his hand. You actually heard me. I'll always hear you, Ashford said. That's a promise. And standing there covered in garden dirt with the man who'd changed everything, Eliza finally let herself believe in promises again. The summer brought changes that felt less like upheaval and more like settling. The kind of changes that happened when people stopped fighting what was in front of them and started building with it instead. Eliza's garden grew faster than expected, vines climbing the makeshift trellises Ashford had built, tomatoes ripening in thick clusters. Sarah spent her mornings helping tend it, learning the difference between weeds and seedlings, dirt permanently embedded under her nails in a way that would have horrified her a year ago. "Mrs. Henderson says our tomatoes are better than hers," Sarah announced one morning, pulling up carrots. She seemed annoyed about it. "She's been growing tomatoes for 30 years, Eliza said. Of course she's annoyed. Should we pretend ours aren't as good? Absolutely not. If we're going to irritate her, might as well do it honestly." Sarah grinned, and Eliza felt that now familiar twist of gratitude. Her sister was 14 now, had turned another year older in June, with a small celebration that involved cake and presents and none of the fear that had shadowed previous birthdays. She was healthy, growing, becoming a person instead of just a problem to solve. Ashford appeared around the side of the house, leading thunder. The foal had grown into a yearling, all legs and attitude, still convinced the entire ranch existed for his entertainment. "He keeps trying to eat the laundry," Ashford said. "Your shirt specifically." "Maybe he has good taste," Sarah said. "Maybe he's a menace." But Ashford was smiling. "Want to help me work him in the round pen?" Sarah dropped the carrots immediately. "Can I?" "If it's okay with your sister." They both looked at Eliza, and she found herself nodding even though she knew Sarah would come back covered in dust and horse slobber. Some things were worth the extra laundry. After they left, Eliza stayed in the garden, pulling weeds and thinking about how strange it was that this had become her life. A year ago, she'd been serving whiskey to drunk ranch hands, counting pennies, watching Sarah die by degrees. Now she was growing vegetables in soil she didn't have to rent, in a place where people said good morning instead of grabbing her waist. It still didn't feel entirely real. The sound of a wagon on the drive pulled her from her thoughts. She stood, shading her eyes, and recognized Doc Pritchard's rig. He'd been coming by monthly to check on Sarah, though the visits were more social than medical now. "Morning, Eliza," he called, climbing down. "Sarah around?" "With Ashford and the horse. I can get her." "No rush. Actually, I wanted to talk to you first." He pulled his medical bag from the wagon. "Mind if we sit?" They settled on the porch steps. Pritchard looked tired, older than Eliza remembered, the kind of worn that came from years of trying to fix things that couldn't be fixed. "How's she doing?" he asked. "Honestly? Good. Better than good. No coughing, appetite's normal, energy's back." Eliza paused. "Why? Is something wrong?" "No, nothing like that." Pritchard set down his bag. "I just wanted you to know that what you did, getting her out of that room, getting her proper care, it saved her life. Another month in those conditions, and we'd be having a very different conversation." The words should have brought relief. Instead, they brought a sharp awareness of how close they'd come. How many small choices and desperate gambles had stood between Sarah living and dying. "I didn't have much choice," Eliza said. "You had every choice. Could have given up. Could have let pride keep you from accepting help. Could have decided it wasn't worth the risk." Pritchard looked at her seriously. "But you didn't, and that matters." Eliza didn't know what to say to that, so she said nothing. Pritchard stood, collecting his bag. "I'll go check on the patient. Though between you and me, I think these visits are more about her showing me whatever book she's currently reading than any medical necessity." He was right. Sarah spent 20 minutes talking about a biography of explorers while Pritchard pretended to be fascinated, then got a clean bill of health and went back to the round pen. After he left, Eliza found Ashford in the barn, brushing down thunder. "Doc says Sarah's doing well," she said. "She is." Ashford ran the brush along Thunder's flank in long, steady strokes. "You did that. Got her out when it mattered. You helped. I wrote a check. You did the hard part. Survived long enough to get here. Kept going when most people would have quit." He set down the brush. "That takes something most people don't have. Desperation? Strength." He turned to face her. "There's a difference." Eliza leaned against the stall door. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if you hadn't come to the Rusty Nail that night. Someone else would have helped eventually. You don't know that. I know you wouldn't have given up. Would have found another way. He crossed to her. That's who you are. She wanted to believe that, wanted to think she was the kind of person who'd have figured it out regardless. But the truth was messier. She'd been one bad week from collapse when Ashford had walked through those saloon doors. Luck and timing had saved her as much as strength had. But maybe that was okay. Maybe surviving didn't require being invincible. Maybe it just required being stubborn enough to take help when it appeared. I have something for you, Ashford said, pulling a paper from his pocket. Been meaning to give you this. Eliza unfolded it. A deed. For the north pasture he'd sold to cover the settlements, except the buyer was listed as Eliza Vance. What is this? Insurance. The land's in your name now. If anything happens to me, you and Sarah are taken care of. Colt, let me finish. He took her hands. I know we're taking things slow. Know you're not ready for promises or permanence. But I need you to know you're not dependent on my goodwill or my continued existence. You own something now. Can't be taken away. The gesture made her throat tight. Because it wasn't about romance or obligation. It was about giving her the one thing she'd never had. Security that didn't rely on anyone else. This is too much, she managed. It's not enough, but it's a start. He squeezed her hands. You don't have to do anything with it. Just know it's there. Eliza looked at the deed, at this man who kept finding ways to prove he understood what she needed before she knew herself. Thank you. You're welcome. That evening, she told Sarah about the land. Her sister's eyes went wide. We own land? Apparently. Like real land that we can keep? That's generally how ownership works. Sarah launched herself at Eliza, hugging hard enough to bruise. We're not going to have to leave? The question cracked something open, because that's what Sarah had been afraid of all along, not the illness, not the poverty, but the leaving. The constant fear that whatever good thing they found would be temporary. No, Bug, Eliza said into her sister's hair. We're not leaving. The town's opinion shifted gradually, the way public sentiment always did, in grudging increments and whispered revisions. The families who'd received settlements spoke well of Ashford. The mine workers appreciated the new safety standards. And eventually, the tide of gossip turned from condemnation to something closer to respect, not universal. Frank Morrison still glared whenever he saw Eliza in town. A few of the wealthier families still snubbed Ashford at the general store. But the hostility had lost its heat, had become more habit than conviction. In August, the mayor approached Ashford about joining the town council. We need people who put ethics over profit, he said, awkward but sincere. What you did, exposing the mine violations, it set a precedent, made other landowners nervous about cutting corners. Ashford had accepted and now spent one evening a week in town hall meetings, arguing about water rights and road maintenance and whether the schoolhouse needed a new roof. Eliza went with him sometimes, sitting in the back and listening to men debate budgets and ordinances. It was boring work, the kind of slow, bureaucratic grind that didn't make for good stories. But it was also the work that built something lasting. After one particularly tedious meeting about livestock regulations, they walked back to the wagon under a sky full of stars. Do you ever regret it? Eliza asked. Everything you gave up? Ashford considered the question. I regret that it was necessary. Regret that my father's choices made it necessary, but the actual doing of it? No. Even though you lost money, status, friends? I didn't lose anything that mattered. He helped her into the wagon. The money's still enough. The status was built on lies, and anyone who stopped being my friend over this wasn't really a friend to begin with. That's very practical. I have my moments. On the ride home, Eliza found herself thinking about choices and consequences, about how Ashford had chosen truth over comfort and survived it, how she'd chosen to stay when every instinct screamed to run, how sometimes the right choice was the hard one, and you just had to trust it would work out. September brought the harvest. Eliza's garden produced more than they could eat, so she started selling the excess at the general store. Mrs. Henderson bought tomatoes with visible reluctance, still annoyed about being outgrown. You could give me your secret, she said, counting out coins. Manure and prayer, Eliza said, which was mostly true. Smart mouth. I learned from the best, Mrs. Henderson almost smiled. Your father would be proud. He always said you were the stubborn one. The mention of her father should have hurt. For a long time it would have, sharp and immediate. But now it just felt like memory, present but not painful. He was right about that, Eliza said quietly. That night she told Ashford about the conversation. Do you think about him a lot? He asked. Less than I used to, which feels wrong somehow. Why wrong? Because forgetting feels like betrayal. Ashford was quiet for a moment. I don't think you're forgetting. I think you're healing. There's a difference. Is there? Yeah. Forgetting means he's gone. Healing means you're carrying him differently. Not as an open wound, but as something that shaped who you are. He reached for her hand. He's still part of you, just not the only part anymore. The observation settled into Eliza's chest, finding a home there. Because Ashford was right, her father hadn't disappeared. He lived in the way she fought for Sarah, in her stubbornness, in the garden she'd planted because he'd taught her to grow things. Memory didn't require constant pain to be real. In October, Ashford proposed. Not with fanfare or grand gestures, but quietly one evening in the library while they were reading. He just looked up from his book and said, "Marry me." Eliza blinked. What? Marry me. Not because you have to, not because of the land or the job or any practical reason, just because I love you and want to build a life with you. He set down his book. And before you say anything, I know we agreed to take things slow. So if you're not ready, we'll wait. A year, 5 years, however long you need. Her heart was doing complicated things in her chest. You love me? Of course I love you. How is that a surprise? You never said it before. I'm saying it now. He crossed to her chair, knelt so they were eye level. I love you. I love your strength and your stubbornness and the way you never let anyone push you around. I love how you protect Sarah and how you're kind even when you're angry. I love that you make terrible coffee and excellent vegetables and you're honest even when it would be easier to lie. Eliza was crying, which was annoying. My coffee's not that bad. It's pretty bad. You still drink it. Because you made it. He wiped her tears with his thumb. So what do you say? She thought about everything that had brought them here. The grief and guilt, the settlements and scandals, the slow building of trust between two people who'd both learned that safety was a lie. She thought about her father, about whether he'd approve of her marrying into the family that had killed him. And she realized she already knew the answer. Her father had valued honesty, hard work, taking responsibility for your mistakes. Ashford had done all of that, had proven himself in the ways that mattered. Yes, she said, I'll marry you. His smile could have powered the whole territory. But, Eliza added, I want to do it right. Small ceremony, nothing fancy. And I want to tell Sarah first. Whatever you want. They told Sarah the next morning. Her reaction was to scream loud enough to scare the chickens, then hug them both so hard Ashford pretended he couldn't breathe. Finally, she said, I thought you'd never ask her. You knew I was going to? Everyone knew. You look at her like she hung the moon, Sarah grinned. Also, you asked my permission 3 weeks ago. Eliza turned to Ashford. You asked her permission? Seemed appropriate. What did you tell him? Eliza asked Sarah. That if he hurt you, I'd poison his coffee. Sarah's grin widened. Which wouldn't be hard since your coffee already tastes like poison. Everyone's a critic. They were married in November, a year and a day after Eliza had first walked onto the ranch, desperate and afraid. The ceremony was small, just Doc Pritchard and a few ranch hands and some of the mining families who'd received settlements. Sarah stood beside Eliza, holding a bouquet of the last garden flowers before frost killed them. The mayor officiated, reading from a worn legal text that made marriage sound more like a property contract than a promise. But when Ashford said, I do, and Eliza said, I do, and they kissed while Sarah cheered, it felt like more than words. It felt like choosing trust over fear, choosing to build something new from the wreckage of the past, choosing each other despite all the reasons they shouldn't work. The reception was held in the ranch house, simple food and cheap whiskey, and people who'd learned to respect what Ashford and Eliza represented. Not wealth or status, but the harder work of being decent. Mrs. Henderson gave them a quilt she'd made, which was as close to an apology as the older woman could manage. Doc Pritchard gave them advice about patience and compromise that sounded suspiciously like he'd learned it the hard way. The ranch hands gave them a wagon wheel they'd carved their names into, which was sweet even if it was completely impractical. Sarah gave them a book she'd written herself, The True Story of How My Sister Saved My Life, which made Eliza cry and Ashford laugh, and everyone agree Sarah was too smart for her own good. That night, lying in bed beside her husband, Eliza stared at the ceiling and tried to process that this was her life now. "You okay?" Ashford asked. "Just thinking." "About what?" "About how strange it is. A year ago I was terrified Sarah would die, and I couldn't do anything about it. Now I'm married to a man I barely knew existed, living in a house I never imagined I'd see the inside of." "Regrets?" "No." She turned to face him, just aware of how much had to go right for us to end up here. "If you hadn't come to the saloon that night, if I hadn't been desperate enough to accept help, if you hadn't been honest about your family, any of those things go different, and we're not here. So we got lucky." "Yeah, but we also worked for it." She took his hand. "Luck got us started. Everything else we built ourselves." Ashford pulled her closer. "I like that version better." "Me too." Over the following months, they settled into being married the way they'd settled into everything else. Imperfectly, but honestly. They fought about stupid things like who forgot to close the gate and whose turn it was to deal with the chickens. They learned each other's rhythms, figured out compromise, discovered that being partners was different than being employer and employee. It was harder than Eliza expected and easier than she feared. Sarah thrived. She'd taken over managing the garden completely, expanded it, started selling produce regularly. She'd also started helping Doc Pritchard with his rounds, learning basic medicine and discovering she was good at it. "I think I want to be a doctor," she announced one evening at dinner. Ashford didn't even blink. "Then we'll make sure you get trained properly." "You mean it?" "Why wouldn't I?" "Because I'm a girl, and girls don't become doctors." "Some do," Eliza said, "and you're stubborn enough to be one of them." In the spring, Ashford proposed something that had been building in conversations for months, using part of the ranch land to build a school. "Red Hollow doesn't have one," he said, spreading plans on the kitchen table. "Kids who want education have to go to Cheyenne or get tutored privately. Most families can't afford that." "So you want to build a school?" Eliza said. "I want us to build a school, together." He looked at her seriously. "Free education for any kid who wants it, regardless of whether their parents can pay. Hire real teachers, buy real books. Give people a chance." It was ambitious, probably too ambitious, but Eliza found herself nodding anyway. "Okay, let's do it." The school took 2 years to build. They fundraised, argued with the town council about permits, hired teachers from back east who didn't mind frontier conditions. Sarah helped interview candidates, wielding her questions like weapons until they found people who actually cared about teaching. When it finally opened in the fall of 1878, 23 children showed up that first day. By the end of the month, there were 40. By winter, they had to add another classroom. Eliza taught basic literacy 3 days a week, standing in front of kids whose parents worked the mines or the ranches, whose futures had been limited by circumstance until now. She saw her own past in their faces, the hunger for something more, the stubborn refusal to accept that this was all life offered. "You're good at this," Ashford said one evening, after she'd spent an hour helping a 10-year-old boy sound out words. "I remember what it's like, having to choose between working and learning because there wasn't time for both." "You chose working." "Because I had to. These kids shouldn't have to make that choice." The clinic came next. Doc Pritchard was getting old, needed help, and there wasn't another doctor within 50 miles. So they built a small medical building next to the school, hired a young doctor fresh from medical school in Philadelphia, and made it known that no one would be turned away for inability to pay. The costs added up. The ranch ran leaner than it had in Ashford's father's day. But they were building something that mattered more than profit, a community where people took care of each other. One afternoon in early summer, Eliza was working in the garden when a wagon pulled up. A young woman climbed down, holding a baby, looking uncertain. "Can I help you?" Eliza asked. "I heard—" The woman stopped, started again. "I heard you give work to people who need it, and I need it." Her story came out in pieces. Husband killed in a ranch accident, no family. 2 children to feed. She'd been working at a saloon in Cheyenne, but the owner had gotten handsy and she'd left. Eliza knew that story, had lived a version of it. "What's your name?" "Catherine. Catherine Ward." "Catherine, I'm Eliza. Come inside. Let's get you and the baby some food. Then we'll figure out work." She gave Catherine a job in the kitchen, room in one of the workers' cottages, a safe place for her children. And when Catherine asked why, Eliza said simply, "Because someone did the same for me once. Might as well pass it along." Over the years, they helped more people like Catherine. Women fleeing bad situations, families who'd lost everything, workers injured and unable to support themselves. The ranch became known as a place that gave second chances, that measured worth and effort rather than circumstances. It wasn't charity. Everyone worked. But it was fair, which was more than most places offered. Sarah did eventually become a doctor, went to medical school in Chicago, came back to Red Hollow, took over the clinic when Doc Pritchard retired. She was fierce and competent and scared the hell out of anyone who underestimated her, which was most people at first. Eliza was proud in ways she couldn't articulate. Years passed. The school grew. The clinic expanded. The ranch stayed profitable enough to support it all. Red Hollow changed from a rough frontier town to an actual community, the kind where people looked out for each other. And through it all, Eliza and Ashford built a life together. Not perfect. They still fought, still struggled, still faced problems that didn't have easy answers. But they faced them together, which made the difference. On the 20th anniversary of the mine collapse, they held a memorial. All 18 families came. They dedicated a monument in the town square, listing every name of every man who died because safety was expensive and lives were cheap. Matthew Vance's name was third from the top. Eliza stood in front of it, Ashford beside her, Sarah on her other side, and felt the weight of years settle differently. The grief hadn't disappeared, probably never would, but it had transformed into something she could carry without it crushing her. "He'd be proud of you," Ashford said quietly. "You think?" "I know. You turned his death into something that prevents other deaths. That matters." Eliza touched her father's name on the monument. "I hope so." That evening, sitting on the porch and watching the sunset paint the ranch in gold, Eliza thought about survival and what it meant. She'd spent so many years just trying to make it to tomorrow, to keep Sarah alive, to avoid drowning in the constant emergency of being poor. But survival wasn't the end goal. It was the beginning. Everything she'd built, the garden, the school, the clinic, the marriage, the life, had only been possible because she'd survived long enough to build it. And now other people were surviving because of what she and Ashford had created. It was a kind of legacy her father would have understood. Sarah came out onto the porch, medical bag in hand. "Mrs. Henderson's having chest pains. I'm going to check on her. Want company?" "I've got it," Sarah smiled. "But thanks." After she left, Ashford said, "Remember when she was the one who needed taking care of?" "Every day. Still can't quite believe she's a doctor." "She's exactly like you. Stubborn, smart, refuses to quit." "She's better than me. Less angry." "You're less angry now, too." Eliza considered that. "Yeah, I guess I am." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sky darken. Somewhere in the distance, Thunder's offspring were running in the pasture. The ranch had become known for breeding good horses, another unexpected success. "What are you thinking?" Ashford asked. Eliza leaned into him. "I'm thinking about that first night. When you asked what I wanted most and I said one day off. I remember. I was so tired. Tired of working, tired of worrying, tired of survival being the only goal." She paused. "And now I have more than I ever imagined. Not just days off, but a whole life." "Any regrets?" She thought about the question seriously, thought about the grief and struggle, the impossible choices and desperate gambles. Thought about her father, gone 20 years but still present in the work they did. "No," she said finally. "I wouldn't change any of it. Because all of it, the pain, the fear, the hard choices, it led here. And here is pretty good." "Just pretty good?" She smiled. "Okay, better than pretty good." Ashford kissed her forehead. "I'll take it." Later, lying in bed, Eliza thought about the girl she'd been, 23 and exhausted, standing in a smoky saloon, watching her sister die and not knowing how to stop it. That girl had been so focused on surviving the next day that she couldn't imagine a future beyond it. But she'd survived anyway, had kept going when it would have been easier to quit, had taken help when pride said not to, had built something better than survival. And maybe that was the lesson worth remembering, that survival wasn't the end of the story. It was just the foundation. Everything else, love, purpose, legacy, you built on top of it, piece by piece, choice by choice. The morning light came gentle through the window. Ashford was still asleep beside her, peaceful in a way that suggested he'd finally stopped carrying his father's guilt. Sarah was probably already at the clinic, terrifying patients into taking better care of themselves. The ranch would wake soon, workers heading to the barns, children walking to school, the daily rhythm of a community that functioned. Eliza got up quietly, went to the window, looked out at the land she owned, at the garden that would need tending, at the buildings they'd built, at the life they'd created from nothing but stubbornness and hope. She'd wanted one day off. She'd gotten a lifetime. And standing there in the early morning light, Eliza Ashford, once Vance, once a girl too tired to dream, smiled. Not because everything was perfect. It wasn't. Life was still hard, still full of problems and struggles and things that couldn't be fixed. But she wasn't just surviving anymore, she was living, and that made all the difference.